Well, I don't know if this is the fourth, fifth, sixth, or 10th time you've been on the podcast, but it's always a joy, and I love seeing you, my good friend, Dr. John Delony. Welcome back to the podcast.
What's up, C2? Man, so good to see you. We
Yeah.
need to hang out in person.
We do, and it's
a couple
been
of years, I think, since we hung out in person, isn't it?
2019. I haven't been on a plane since I saw you in Nashville in October. Was that October? November?
Dude, get on a
2019?
plane. It
Yeah,
still
I'm
smells.
coming.
It's still weird. They're still late. It's great. Come on.
I'm coming. Oh my gosh. Well, listen, this is just cool because we're actually catching up on a conversation we had before you just said, Chris, just hit record. So here we are. And we were just talking about me as a friend, and like I read the book and I'm crying through parts of it, and I want to back up and maybe we'll just go there. You called me on a Friday morning and you were just sharing how this book was weighty to write.
Yeah.
Let's just go there. Why?
I talk about myself and my life for a living.
Yeah, you do.
And
Yeah.
I am a pretend extrovert for a living. And so one of my superpowers is getting people in real close to me, but this like 6 or 8 inches of space is mine. And this, I've still got about 2 inches that are mine. There's a few stories of my childhood, the trauma stuff I'll never talk about publicly, but that's pretty close. This is as close as I've ever let anybody get. And there's just some stories I've never told publicly, some stuff I had to sit down with people I love and family members and say, hey, are you okay with this going out? Only 12 or 15 people will buy this book, and so not a lot will read it. So that wasn't true, but so yeah, it was a personal book, and more than anything, I kind of lay down my own defenses on this one.
Yeah.
So there's no way to connect with people in a real, authentic way, and to be honest, if you're just gonna keep hiding it. So here we are.
Oh, I love that because your first book, Redefining Anxiety, was awesome. A little quick read, and we've talked about it here on the podcast. But after that Friday morning when you called me, and we were just honestly catching up, and you were telling me, because I had no idea that you had written this big of a book, and you were telling me about it. And as I'm reading it through the context of knowing you as a friend, I mean, I'm reading stuff I've never known about you before, and I think it gives credibility and brings you closer to, I don't know, people's heart space maybe. I'm just proud of you for it.
Well, I appreciate that. The number one goal out of the gate was there's so many good books that teach me stuff, that tell me stuff. I haven't read but one or two that I felt like were walking with me as a reader. And so the goal here was, how do we, most of the stuff is thousands of years old, right?
Yeah.
How do I sit down with somebody and walk with them? And it's like, only can do that, man, is if you're honest and you tell the truth and you tell where you screwed up and where you've hurt people and where they've hurt you. And then you go from there. And that's just, it's new space for me, man.
Well,
and here's the other thing.
Yeah.
When you do that, when you tell your story like that and nobody wants to read it, that's like, there's nowhere to hide, right? That's just, they don't want to hear from you. You know what I mean? It's exposing too.
Well, it's, I tell you, this is how it felt for me reading the book because, and we'll talk about it, as we get into this conversation, but you called me on another day, on a Monday one time, and we were catching up, and I was in a real tough space. It was last summer you called me, and as I'm reading your book, I correlate it to that experience because you just put words to it. It feels like you're walking with people, and I really think this book, Own Your Past, Change Your Future, is going to be that experience for a lot of people. I hope it does, because coming out of 2 years of just total disruption, geopolitical turmoil, COVID, all the things, I feel like in the conversations I facilitate lately, people just want others to walk alongside them, and I feel like that's what you're doing so well here. So let me form a question out of that. We met in 2019, and as you alluded to, you hadn't shared some of these parts of your story up until this point. Like, why now? Why did you write it now? What's the call that you felt to share for this very moment?
I think deeply in my soul. There's a few bad actors on the global stage. There's a few people I think that for whatever reason are not good people. Other than that, I think most people, and this is informed by 20 years of experience of just in the craziest situations, most people know they could be doing things differently. They could be living better, safer, wholer, fuller, happier, more joyful lives. And they have no picture of what that looks like because their dads didn't show them and their moms didn't show them because they didn't have the toolkit and their grandparents didn't. And their media ecosystem has fine-tuned their brains to just loop what they need and so I think that my little mission in life here is to provide a picture of I look like you and I've had similar experiences than you, or I may not look like you at all, but we share a common humanity. Or I don't have any of your shared experiences, but I sure could learn a lot from you. Or I sure just want you to be my friend and share a cup of coffee with me and I'll pay for it, right? So I think that's where the solution to the madness lies, is saying, dude, yes, I got a fancy podcast and a cool book and I host a neat rate. Dude, I don't know what day it is when it comes to raising my kids. My 6-year-old says stuff and I don't even know what she's talking about. And I've been doubled over too with my own stuff. And so let's carve a new third path and start walking alongside people and being honest instead of platforming everything.
The through line through what you said was around stories. When we can get close to people and share stories and make space for people to tell their stories in a shame-free environment is so powerful. I want to talk about stories. You wrote that pain is in the stories, but so are solutions. So parse this out for us. Like, what do we need to know in order to move forward through this theme of stories?
We've been given really two paths forward. And one path is your feelings are everything. Everything is dictated by how you feel. You feel good about this, you feel bad about this, and you get to make up truth along the way. And alongside those feelings is you are defined by the worst thing that ever happened to you. You're defined by the worst thing you've ever done. You will always be a survivor of X. You will always be identified with Y. Build 1,000 bridges, great. You cheat once, you are a cheater. That's who you are. So that's path one. In path one, you have to have an external entity come save you because you're broken and you can't. You got to have a government come in. You've got to have a group come in and save you. The other path is if you have feelings, there's a character flaw. Like you're broken. There's something wrong with you. Suck it up, exercise more, read tougher things and listen to meaner podcasts and then grind it and crush it and kill it and then go do it again and do it again. Those are the two paths that we've been given. And this one is the new third way. And there's nothing new about it. It's things that poets and mystics and wise people throughout history have been telling us. But it's, man, you have to own the stories. You have to own what you were born into, what you were told, the things that you did and the stories that result from that. You've got to own that. And then you have to ask yourself one terrifying, haunting question. What comes next? What do I do now? So you have to say, I was abused. It happened. My dad didn't show up for me. I was kicked out of here because of the color of my skin. Like, you have to own that. And then you have to also own, okay, what do I do next? And that's the gap that I don't think is addressed enough.
Path one, is that the reason for cancel culture?
Cancel culture, I think, is I think that's about power. I think that's about power and response, and power is intoxicating. And when you don't have an end game, which for some is death and for others is reconciliation, if your end game is death, then cancel culture can survive. I do think that the feelings thing ends up in this makes me uncomfortable, or I don't like this, or this makes me sad, or we know enough now, like this triggers cortisol and adrenaline. I had a buddy of mine, he's a legal professor, legal scholar, and if you hang around legal scholars, they're just such brilliant minds, but they're always thinking, how would I turn this argument, how would I connect this argument to law? And when you assault somebody, you punch them in the face, and so there's a physical impact there. Mm-hmm. And he made a compelling case when we were just having nachos one day. I think if you say something that's offensive to somebody and it causes them deleterious effects from cortisol and adrenaline and stress hormones, that's a physical impact. I'm going to call that assault. And we argued back and forth, But I think that was the ultimate line of thinking, which is my feelings are everything. And so if what you just said hurts my feelings, you can never say that ever again. And then we just get on a merry-go-round, right? And that never ends because that just hurt my feelings. And now so I think, yes, then let's just start dropping grenades. And because we found power in dropping grenades, let's just drop them on everybody and everything for every reason, right?
It just makes me curious because I was struck by what you said and how in path one we're defined by our worst mistake. And I'm like, oh, wow, yes, I see that. So where's the opportunity for reconciliation in our stories and just redemption and forgiveness and all that kind of stuff? And maybe what I hear you saying is that happens in path 3, but let's stay on story for a moment, because in your book you talk so well about how stories inform how we organize and experience the world. I want to hear about this and really how it works out for us.
Well, you got the stories you're born into, which is, this is how we do Christmas. This is how our neighborhood celebrates Halloween. This is what God thinks about you. And this is what God doesn't. This is what he'll do if you do the following actions. This is what he'll do to you. And some stories people are born into stories where God's loving and forgiving and he takes care of people. Others are born into he will torture you for eternity. So if you drink or smoke or hang out with girls who chew tobacco, you are good for eternity, right? So you're born into that. And you're born into, we're not a family that makes that kind of money. We are a family who works jobs like X. We aren't a family who wears those kind of clothes. We don't buy those kind of cars. So you're born into a narrative that most of us don't even know. It's the air we breathe. Then we're also have these stories that are told to us, and they can be explicit or implicit. They can be when your uncle abuses you in secret day after day, month after month. That's an implicit story about what your body's worth and about what your feelings and autonomy is worth. And there's also the mom who says, oh, honey, don't wear that shirt because that makes you look pudgy and you want the boys to think you're pretty, don't you? Right. So there's that story. And then there's the other story. Hey, when I took this job, which is a wild left turn departure for me professionally, I remembered one of my high school coaches, Zoe Simpson, told me, Delony, you can do anything. And he said it in such a convincing way that 25 years later, it's still beating in my heart. And I was like, I can probably go do this too. You know what I mean? So stories can be positive too, but you take those two stories and that just sets the stage and provides the jet fuel for our life. And that's how we make our way through it. And those stories ricochet in our hearts and minds so much so that 20 years later, I see an opportunity and I think, I can't do that. That's not who we are. I'm not a kind of guy who can leave his hometown. I'm not a guy who can just quit his job because it's a toxic work environment. I'm not a woman who can just leave a relationship because it's abusive. That's the way my dad does it. It's just I need some more sleep and some me time, right? So those stories cascade through our lives forever until we call it and say enough is enough. Where did that come from? Then what do I do next?
You had that mentor, that coach in your life that spoke life into you, but I'd like to propose perhaps that for other people, things like blame and cynicism could also be jet fuel.
Oh, are you kidding me?
You know what I'm saying? Like, go there. How do we stop going to blame, to cynicism, to self-protection, self-promotion as a coping mechanism through our stories? Because, man, that's jet fuel too, right?
Yeah, but that jet fuel runs out. I'd say that's more like rocket fuel. That makes you do hard things really fast for a short period of time. And so I can look at an abusive father and say, I will never be like that. And then my kids come along and I will never be like that. And I will never be like that. And I will never be like that. So cool. You never yell and hit your kid. That is actually extraordinary. And instead you hide in the garage, you hide on a golf course. You don't hug your kids. And so there's a difference between I'm never going to be like that and I'm going to make sure my son knows that he is the most loved son on planet Earth. And that means I'll hold him accountable and I'll be connected to him. That has legs. That will go forever, right? So one of those things is a short burst that can get you there. You're running on adrenaline. The other one is running on a whole different system, man. And so that one's got legs. That'll carry you through your life. What I see with people who run on anger and run on resentment and run on blame is they have to find a new demon. And they've got to find a new demon and a new demon and a new demon.
Yeah.
And I had a fascinating conversation with yet another legal scholar a few years ago talking about she was in a famous Supreme Court case, and then a few years later there was something else. Like, what are you doing? Like, how did you go from that court case to this one way out here? And she said, all we were fighting for was justice in this part of our lives. And then over time, our identity shifted from looking for justice to we became fighters. And then we just started fighting everything and everyone. We just looked for the next fight. And so if you're running on blame and cynicism, you'll find somebody else to hate. And then once you've stamped that out, or that's run its course, you just go to the next thing to hate. And man, that's just such a dismal way to live.
What I love about stories is that they can become foundations upon which we build our lives towards growth and wholeness, as we've been talking about here. But I'd love to just parse apart the notion of moving on from moving forward. And to me, the latter, moving on, sort of implies like taking an eraser to a season of life. I don't think amnesia about our past is a solution to our pain. Can you distinguish moving forward versus moving on?
I hate the phrase moving on.
Me too.
I like moving with. I hear that a lot when, I've had it's a holy honor to sit with people who've lost loved ones, who've just dealing with the most catastrophic losses. And people tell them at some point you'll be ready to move on. And I always stop and say, no, you won't. You will walk with this forever. The pain won't be as sharp. It'll always be a hole. There'll always be an ache. And we are so desperate for people to feel better around us because it makes us feel better. It makes us feel bad when people around us feel bad. So, I don't like moving on. I like moving with. The key there is moving. And forward is fine, but we're a culture that's trapped in our own heads. And we go from our head to our belly button, our head to our belly button. And we have to start acting. We've got to start moving. And the thoughts... It's very counter enlightenment, but our thoughts will begin to follow our actions if we will just get up and move.
Yeah, one of my favorite parts through your book, Own Your Past, Change Your Future, is how you used the picture of bricks in the backpack. Man, that hit me so strongly because it's exactly how I feel. Now, paint the picture of how stories are like bricks in a backpack. Like, how does that whole thing play out day to day for us?
Well, so... Let's say, Chris, you got called in to where you work, and they said, hey, you've been doing a great job here. We've got a whole new role for you, and we're creating it with you in mind, but it's got some stuff that you've never done before, so you're going to have to take 6 months to learn these new things, but then it's going to pay this, and it's going to be a significant increase, and then it's going to be... You might step back and go, bring it, I'm all in. Or you might step back and say, whoa, because you're carrying around stories about uncertainty, job change, about I've never made that kind of money before, about I'm not going to take 6 months off to go learn. I'm done with school. I've already got my degree. All of those things are stories that we carry with us, and that weight is like a backpack full of bricks. And I think every person is born out of the gate with bricks. I mean, with a backpack. I'm sorry. I'm 6'2" white male from Texas who grew up in a Christian home, and my parents just celebrated their 50th anniversary. You could look at my backpack and say, right out of the gate, you've got fewer bricks just than my friend Danielle has, right? Yeah. So she's got different sets of bricks, and her friend has different sets of bricks, and my other friend. So everyone's shot out of the cannon with different bricks, and then you throw in trauma and the stories and all that. It weighs you down, and over time, man. I'm saying no to things or yes to things or putting up with things, and I don't even know that I'm carrying this stuff around. And when you set it down, that's when you go, holy smokes, I had no idea. You know what I mean?
Okay, well, you just sort of set up my next question because this was the case for me. We get so used to the proverbial weight of the backpack that after a while, we actually think it's normal life. Like, I don't know life without this. And
it feels uncomfortable to not even be wearing it.
Correct. Okay, so let's
weird.
Let's talk about those two factors. It feels weird without it, and then what does it take to set it down? Because, in other words, we've created this identity out of what happened to me. And we'll get into identity of a victim here later. But I want to spend some time on those two things. Okay. We feel weird without it. Number one, let's just talk about that. What plays into that? And then I want to talk about what does it take to set it down?
I think physiologically and psychologically, our bodies are always solving for what it knows, for familiar.
Yes.
Constantly.
Even if familiar is dysfunctional and unhealthy, right?
And it will kill you.
Yeah.
And we have a part of our brain, and you've had some great people on your podcast talk about this.
Yeah.
We've got trauma scanners going all of the time, and it remembers, oh yeah, this plus that equals hurt. So I'm storing that one in the backpack too. And I'm from Texas, all right? So this is a terrible analogy to use.
Yeah.
But my dad was a homicide detective growing up. And I remember a few times we'd go to church or go to, I don't know, to a place where he wasn't going to have his gun on him. And we'd walk in and I would just remember him would pat himself looking for it. Like just it was a comfort thing. And he was so used to it. It was a part of him as a licensed peace officer that not having it felt weird. Now, for you and me to carry around a big giant whatever and another one in our sock, and then like that would feel like a burden. But when you do that all the time, it becomes a part of you, and then it becomes a part of your safety mechanism. See what I'm saying? And so, maybe a better one instead of that is he wore his bulletproof vest into SWAT hostage negotiation things. If he showed up without that vest, he would feel completely exposed, completely naked, completely unsafe. And so we've got these two things. We have a body that's always trying to solve for safe. Always trying to solve for familiar. And we have a brain that's saying, hey, we're going to keep this thing back here just as a reminder. If it shows up, then we're going to be ready to rock and roll. And that's the true bravery of moving forward is I got to set that stuff down and say, I'm going to be willing to get hurt again because that's the only way I can heal. Period.
You want to walk us through the mechanics of that? I'm willing to get hurt. That's the decision that we make.
Yeah.
Then we position ourselves through vulnerability in relationships, emotional risk.
Right.
To move forward, to build muscles of resistance and endurance and perseverance, and we can break all that down. But walk us through the mechanics of that, because what I don't want people to walk away from this conversation doing is just having it stored in theory. Oh, that sounds good, but they don't do anything about it. How do we do it?
So when I would show up to a scene,
yeah,
and let's say somebody had here's one that I'm just thinking in my mind.
Yep.
And it's a tough one to walk through. But a girlfriend and her boyfriend were staying at her dad's house, and they had gotten in a fight. She'd gotten up, and it's about 2 a.m., and it's long past when anyone should be having any sort of rational discussion into it. And they got into a fight, and she said something, and he said something, and she got up and went to the bathroom. Said something to him, and then went to the bathroom. Well, he stepped outside on the back porch and took his life, just like that. And we showed up, right? So we showed up. Now, there was all kinds of mental health challenges. They were highly intoxicated, all kind of stuff going on. But with her in that moment, when I arrived, we went for a walk and began counting cracks in the sidewalk, like the little wooden spacers. And here's what all I was trying to do was what just happened is the most terrifying thing that's ever experienced. I need your brain back that you're safe now. Now, psychologically, emotionally, relationally, you're going to deal with this the rest of your life. But right this second, you're not limbic anymore. We're going to bring you back. And so the mechanics is I have to be able to think about these things that happened without my body taking off on me. That's trauma healing. I have to be able to think about the abuse, or not even the abuse, not even going into the actual things that happened. I got to be able to hear the name of that guy and be able to stay present and say, I'd prefer not to talk about that. Let's go on to the next thing. And my heart rate doesn't take off on me, and my blood pressure doesn't skyrocket, and I don't default to my coping mechanisms, which we all have. And so healing looks like I'm going to be willing to have that particular incident in my head again with the right scaffolding and the right support, what's often clinical, right? So that I can enter into, because you know what I'm going to have to do? I'm going to have to be in relationship with other people moving forward. And a relationship almost killed me last time. So this time I'm going to have to be willing to get hurt again so that I can be healed moving forward. Is that the mechanics make sense there?
It does, and you tipped your hat to something I want to unpack a little bit, and you talked about it in the book as well. It's creating distance between our thoughts and our bodies. What does that mean, and how do we do it?
Our bodies are so extraordinary as they automate everything.
Yes.
Right? And you know this. You and I've talked about it. Like, it automates everything. So it's like, oh, that guy's a threat. And then I'm sounding the alarms before I even know what my body just witnessed, right? Or think about when you're walking down an alley. Mm-hmm. And you just get that sense that something's not okay. Something in your body has either seen the wrong John Wick movie or has been down an alley and you got assaulted in the past. Like, something in your body is saying this is not okay.
Right.
And so it automates those things, and it automates them quickly, which is why whatever media you absorb all day long that says those people, whoever they are, is the problem, or that people who look like that are the problem, or people who say these things or vote this way, they're evil. Our brain will say, cool, message noted, and it will outsource that and offload it as quick as possible so that when you're in the presence of somebody who votes differently than you, you instantly think you know everything about all of their thoughts and all of their dreams and all of their hopes and everything they hate, and all. It just outsources it all and goes, right? It offloads it. And so creating that space, that distance, is about stopping that thing before it gets going. Saying, whoa, there it goes on me. I'm going to look around and see what's not safe, because I think I just happen to be in a dark alley, but I think I'm okay. Hey, that person just made my heart rate go, oh, that reminds me of such and such. I'm going to move on about my day, right? So it's creating that gap. Here's an easy one. I was, you'll get it. I think I told you this. I don't know if I told you this. I was driving to work the other day, and I was being an irresponsible, terrible driver and an idiot citizen, and I was doing some Wim Hof breathing exercises in my car. And I did one round, and then I did a second round, and then I thought, dude, I'm going to push it and do one more round. And I passed out and totaled my car. I hit the concrete median and raked all the way down the median, and it was a rough deal.
When was
this? It banged me up. It's about 2 months ago, maybe, month and a half ago. It was a rough ordeal. So the next time I was driving to work in my old beat up pickup truck now, because that's what I drive. When I came around, I started heading up to that exit where I passed out and went off the thing. And dude, my heart started racing. I started grabbing the wheel a little bit tighter. And then somebody cut me off, and I instantly was like, "You!" And I said some things about that driver that are not repeatable on any podcast. And my body was saying, "Hey, we remember this story."
Yeah.
And so what I had to do was say, "Hold on, I'm safe. I'm driving the speed limit. I'm not doing stupid breathing exercises in the car, right?" So I was able to create some space between me honking at that guy, driving bananas, having to pull over, etc. And that's years of work, by the way.
Is that secondary trauma, what you just described, where you approach a familiar setting and physiologically you respond in the way you previously did?
No, secondary trauma is when you are a nurse.
Okay.
And all day, every day, you're dealing with sewing other people's wounds up, or you're changing wound dressings, or you're a surgeon and you're changing, or you're taking out somebody's heart and putting a new one in, or you're a police officer, a teacher, or in our current ecosystem, you're somebody who just watches what's going on in Ukraine 24/7, 365, over and over and over and over. And our body has a natural, there's a bear, so it starts the stress response. And we've thought trauma was just for us, but it turns out just walking alongside people who are experiencing trauma, our bodies keep that score. So remember the bricks in the backpack?
100%.
Think about, instead of bricks, think of little pebbles. And it's a pebble, and it's a pebble, and it's a pebble. Over time, that weight of that backpack is the same. It all adds up. And so you can look at an elementary school teacher who's been teaching for 30 or 40 years. They just walk a little hunched. Like they have been carrying the hearts and minds of these little kids for years and years and years. And that's just secondary trauma.
It's interesting. So for me, you and I have talked about this, and I've shared a lot of my personal stuff with you. because of the stuff from my past with my mom and even my own health stuff, when a doctor's office calls me, I feel it, and I can feel a shake. What is that?
Yep.
Is that secondary trauma, or is that what you experienced when you're driving to work?
No, that's a normal trauma response.
Is that right?
That is, my body's got a story about doctors. When the call happens, this is what, it's always negative. And so your body says, hey, we remember that, everybody remember when that number calls, it's bad. And we got to protect Chris. And so that number calls up and it spins up your, and this is where everybody's like, oh, I've got anxiety, I've got depression, I got OCD. Everybody's bodies have got different, ons and off switches flipped up or down. And that's when everybody's body takes off on them, man.
It's really interesting. You and I have talked about this on the side of just doing these interviews and such, but you were on the podcast last January, and we were talking about anxiety through the lens of Redefining Anxiety, your first book, and I was so off in that whole interview because 3 days prior, a doctor's office had called me to let me know I had to go into surgery at the University of Michigan. They found something on my back. And do you remember us talking about that? Like, that was,
absolutely.
I was so embarrassed by that. I just was out of it for the interview, but I was so scared. And so now I look back to that season of my life, and when anybody, a physician, calls me, I have that reaction. So I appreciate you saying that, because I've been trying to figure out which slot that fits in my heart, but that helps.
So one of the great tools, I think, moving forward, and I'll tell you this, man, I thought I was writing this thing, I thought I had stumbled into like a brand new thing. I'd never heard it. I'd never read it. And I was like, man, I am a genius.
Yeah.
And then that happened to be the night that my wife and I just binged the entire season 1 of Ted Lasso. And Ted Lasso says I was like, oh man, they had it in the show. And it's brilliant. It's when he's throwing the darts and he says, hey, what if you chose curiosity over judgment? And so choosing curiosity over judgment with our bodies and with the people in our lives has an entirely different biochemical response. Because judgment says it's me versus, and I've got to uphold this position. Curiosity says, tell me more. I want to learn about that. And so when my body takes off on me, and I've got a few things just like you mentioned. Like, it still goes.
Yeah.
The first thing I ask myself curiously is, what's my body trying to protect me from? Why am I reaching? I'm not even hungry. Why am I getting ice cream? What am I doing? What is my body trying to protect me from? And usually it's some relationship issue, or it's a thing that I've gotten hurt in the past, right? Like I have to go to surgery, or mine is financial, right? So a doctor will call, my heart will start beating, not because I'm worried about going to the doctor, but because I had seasons when I couldn't pay. I couldn't pay the doctor. And it was just a reminder that you're such a loser. You can't even take care of your own body. What kind of dad are you, right? That's the stories that pop up. And I have to be curious about those stories, right? Not judgment.
How do we become more curious instead of defaulting to being judgmental? In fact, I'll just put this quick plug. I just got a book called Them. I don't know if you've heard about it. It's called Them, Why We Hate Each Other and How to Heal. It's by Senator Ben Sasse. And it's all about this division that is so ingrained in culture today. And I was just fascinated by the title, so I got it, but I was curious.
It's a great title. Yeah. I don't know anything about him or that book, but that's a great title for a book.
Yeah.
So ask me a question again.
Yeah. Talk about curiosity versus judgment. How do we become more curious intentionally so that we don't default to us versus them?
You're going to hate my answer.
I hope so.
Is that cool?
Listen, I don't hate anything you tell me, my friend.
Hey, so here it is.
Yeah.
We have to decide that I want things to be different. And that sounds dismissive and counterintuitive. But I have to decide. Anxiety keeps me safe.
Mm-hmm.
It lets me know that I'm being threatened. My depression keeps me safe. It's my body taking care of me. And I have to my remembering and my heart racing and my palms getting sweaty and me remembering how many tiles were on the bathroom floor where I was abused as a kid, that keeps me safe. And I have to decide I don't want to be anxious anymore. I don't want to, which means I've got to let this guard down and practice something new. And so I have to decide that I don't want my heart rate taken off on me every time a doctor calls. So I'm going to lean into the powerlessness of my body, that I can just be going along and I just get a call from a doctor saying that my blood work tells me I might have cancer. I need to come in for further screening. Mm-hmm. That's our life. Mm-hmm. I don't want my heart to take off on me every time the phone rings. And so I'm going to fill in the blank, right? But it's a decision. I don't want to feel like this anymore. And mm-hmm. so I'm going to begin walking in a new, on a new path, right?
You are the third mental health professional that has said exactly that, the power of a decision. And I could spend 3 hours sussing this out with you, because Anna Lemke and I talked about this in our conversation about Dopamine Nation, and she's like, Chris,
she's the best.
There comes a point where we just have to decide. Then I was talking to Dr. Elizabeth Stanley through her book Widen the Window, which changed my life. And here you are as a friend and a professional as well, saying we need to decide. And so I think perhaps the meta narrative for listeners and viewers today is owning our past and changing our future really necessitates a decision, right?
Yeah, I have to decide. Not that I want to quit being. I don't want to drink anymore. Like, I have to decide. I don't want to be 100 pounds overweight anymore. And those decisions, like when. I hate saying it like that, because that has been weaponized over the last 50, 100, 200, 300 years. Yep. We beat each other up, but why don't you just choose to? Well, it's harder than that, because it's not a matter of just, it is a matter of diet and exercise, and it's also a matter of trauma protection and love and relational connection and identity and what I didn't have and guilt and resentments. It's all of that stuff. And if you dismiss it with just choose, and you got to just choose, right? So it's both and. And it's so hard.
We've talked about this before regarding willpower. It's great, but it's a limited commodity. How does decision-making and the ability to decide play into the resource of willpower? Because we're not going to experience transformation. You know, willpower may get us on the road, but it's not going to get us to the destination, I don't believe.
Never. Willpower gets my weekly workout written on Sunday afternoon. That's right. All willpower does.
Okay, but within that is the decision. So how does decision-making set itself into the willpower conversation? Because I don't want people to get confused and thinking, oh, now we're just talking about I decided, and then I run out of steam and I can't get myself up the couch to do it, or whatever.
There is zero, none, never, none, zero. Can I say that again? None, zero. There is no long-term behavior change without other people in your life.
Got it.
Period.
Got
it. Stop. And so, willpower, like that, willpower has become one of those conversations for me I don't even have anymore. I like even Sapolsky's work, who says, "Dude, you don't have any willpower." Like it's a secondary conversation for me. I like making a decision and then creating scaffolding so that decision almost takes care of itself. Meaning, I'm going to tell people this is what I'm doing.
I love that.
I'm a public figure, so I'm going to put out into the universe. But more importantly, I'm going to tell my manager, Cody, who runs my life, hey, this is what I'm going to start doing. I'm going to start getting up earlier, and this is how I need the boundaries at work, because I've got to take care of my body, right? And I've got to start taking care of my sleep. And I'm going to tell my wife, and I'm going to tell my kids. I'm going to bring my kids, right? So you see what I'm saying? Like I'm setting up a context I have to go over a bunch of hurdles to not do it. And I have to take feelings out of the equation. We've given way too much life to feelings. When I have made a decision that I am going to, and I'll just get back in the gym. That's me. Right?
I love it.
I have been playing around in the gym for a while. I work out all the time, but not with any sort of drive. I just kind of get through it, and then I go about my day. I made a decision. I'm going to make some significant changes. And so those significant changes include letting people know, hey, this is coming, writing all this stuff down. And then once it's written down, my feelings don't matter. Don't care about them. Don't care about them. Don't care about them. Don't care about them. Could care less. I'm just going to go work out whether I feel like it or not. I'm just going to go do that thing. And then I'm going to have people texting me at 6 o'clock. You in the gym? You in the gym? How's it going? And I'm going to make it happen, right?
That's your scaffolding.
That's the scaffolding.
Ah.
I cannot do this by myself. Willpower is a tiny piece of can't do this by ourselves, right? But we can't.
Willpower is building a wall without that scaffolding, and then the weight distribution is such where the wall falls. You have to have the scaffolding.
That's right. All day, every day. We have to stop trying to do life by ourselves. You cannot lose 100 pounds alone. You cannot quit drinking alone. You cannot stop being anxious alone.
Yeah.
That's not how our bodies are designed.
Well, that's the second component, what I loved so much about the book, too. And one of these days we're going to have dinner, and we can just get into the weeds about it.
I will pay for any restaurant in Nashville, Tennessee if you'll come down. That's an open invitation. Consider bluff called, my brother.
Oh, boy. Okay.
And you're a foodie. You can pick any one.
This is going to be fun. I'm going to get on Yelp as soon as we're done with this call, dude.
Have a progressive dinner.
Yeah. Okay. Second component of this, owning our past, changing our future, involves relationships then. How have the relationships in your life helped fortify your decision, your ability, your forward progress, your getting healthier, more whole, and maybe even frame it up around, I loved how you opened the book, the cracks that you're trying to find in the foundation of the house. You're crawling around in your skivvies. It's raining. I love that part of the book, but then you had this friend come over who was in construction. Forever friend. And he's like, dude, it's fine. Frame up relationships through that story. And the strength of relationships, I should say.
Ultimately, one of the humbling and clarifying epiphanies I had over the last decade is that I'm often not trustworthy to myself for any number of reasons. And I can fight that. I can go to war with that, or I can just accept that as an is. I don't always see my body well. So I can think, man, you're really letting things go, Delony. You got to get in better shape. Or, man, you're in your 40s now, so I can see this. Really, I can ask my wife, do you still find me attractive? And she says, yes, that's really what I need. And then when I get to work here and I ask the camera folks and the TV folks, hey, things look good? And they'll say, we'll tell you. And after that, any other story I choose to ruminate on or meditate on is a choice to be more miserable. I've had to outsource that.
Yeah.
The same as when I'm trying to solve a problem. And like, so in the book, I talk about, remember earlier we were talking about that line just keeps moving. If your life and your identity is about blame.
Yes.
I felt miserable. My body was trying to get my attention, but it was channeled through my intellect because I thought I was all fancy because I have a bunch of stupid degrees. And so I was trying to put the blame somewhere. And at first it was on the stock market, and then it was on the housing crisis, and then all of a sudden it landed on the cracks in my
I got you.
Just normal, tiny settling cracks that happen at the top of every door in America. Or a little bitty thing. They were nothing. And I couldn't get through a room. I counted them. I would draw little marks on them to see if they were. I was convinced my house was falling. And it took a buddy who we'd been roommates in college, and he came to visit. Our kids played together, and he's one of my best friends. He still is. And he came over, and his dad was an architect. So he grew up on construction sites, and he came and looked and listened to me, and he looked at me and said, your house is fine. It's strong. It's in good order. We're done with this conversation. But I didn't know at the time, and I didn't put this in the book, that my wife had called him and said, I'm worried about John. And he was that close of a friend. And so he's a banker, and he's just a banker through and through. He's a numbers guy. He's a spreadsheet guy. So he's not always the most he didn't always have the most poetic things to say, but his response of, hey, this conversation's done, was, hey, you're hurting your wife. You're not okay. Your house is fine. Let's get on with our lives, right? And that was the moment that I realized I don't see it, but maybe it's me. And I think that's an important, humbling question that has traveled with me through life. Just a year or two later, I had a young man who worked for me. He's an incredible photographer in Dallas. His name's Jordan Bunch. And I asked him one day, why are you such a good mood all the time? Or how do you get through these conflicts? There's a lot of stuff going on. And he said, every time somebody brings conflict into my office, I stop and I look over at that mirror and I ask myself silently, what about this did I bring to the table? And I thought, golly, dude, what if I did that with every one of what if it's me? And so now, 10 years later, 15 years later, I run into problems and challenges. And my first thought is, I'm sorry that I hurt you. Can I buy you a drink? What did I contribute to this? Even if I think I'm right, because it's not about being right anymore, man. It's about other people.
That's the strength of relationships. And I want to go to relationships for a moment. Let's just talk about romantic relationships in relation to trauma and unhealed wounds of the past. Like, how do we attract people, and how are we attracted to people through the influence of the bricks in our backpacks?
Ooh, well, I think we're, man, that's a 3-part podcast series we could probably get into.
I'm in.
I think to sum it up, I think like we say, our bodies are about familiar. And our bodies will join forces with very unhealthy relationships because our bodies remember that story from granddad or from dad, or for the dynamic mom and dad had. Or we will live out of spite and hatred and anger and blame, like we talked about, and we will jet fuel into another relationship that we will supernova with our energy to make sure it doesn't end up like the other one, right?
Yep.
And the things we carry around with us end up, when you link up with somebody romantically, y'all join stories. That's the agreement. And so when one of you starts gripping the steering wheel really tight on the way to Christmas, and the other person thinks Christmas is the most wonderful family reset season there is, you're going to have relational conflict, but it doesn't come out in, hey, I see that you're really struggling with how Christmas, what that meant to your family, and how y'all didn't have Christmas and everybody was angry and your dad was an alcoholic. It comes out in, why are you always late? And you need to pick up your stuff. And why are you such a grouch? And why don't you just leave me alone? That's how it comes out. And now you've got relational dynamics that have nothing to do with the relationship. It has everything to do with these stories we're carrying around, these bricks we're carrying around. And so we link up with somebody that we're destined to go to war with. And then we go to war, and then we have to build new lives out of ash. And then we have kids, and they see all that happen, and then they do it to their kids. And now we got a legacy.
Does that give weight to when you wrote in the book this, quote, my generation and younger is trying to find their soulmate first and then reverse engineer a meaningful life around our feelings. We start with, you complete me, that stupid Jerry Maguire ideal, and then we work backwards, end quote. So, number one, I'd love to just engineer this properly. Where should we start? Where do we need to start? And how do we reframe that even around what you just shared about picking a person to go to war with?
My grandparents, before my granddad passed away a few years ago, they did 72 years. That was the last anniversary. That's 72.
Beautiful.
That's great. It's beautiful, and it's nuts, man. That's a long time.
Yeah.
And they got married, then my granddad went off to World War II, and then they were from this place, and then he got his engineering degree. They were all over. Marriage was, for most of history, romance, if you will, was either a way for people to make political gain or economic gain. Like, your son marry my daughter, and I'll give you some goats, and then we can expand our name, right? Or it was, hey, life's pretty short and pretty crappy. I'll do it with you. You in? I'll do it with you. You in? You're cute. This looks fun. And then let's do life. And now we're in the Jerry Maguire generation. But here's what happened with my grandparents. They became soulmates after being arm in arm on the front lines of 72 years. They breathed the same air. They took the same steps. They laughed at this. Like, they became an entity. And so when my granddad died, my grandmother couldn't breathe. She couldn't think because part of her was gone. And that's a soulmate. And what we've tried to do now is come up with the right app and the right song lyric and the right proposal that's perfectly curated for Instagram. We're trying to create that on the front end. You can't. That's why they don't put, when you go to the military and you go to basic training for 6 weeks, they don't just like put you in a room and have a pep rally. They make you make your bed and do jumping jacks and do workouts and do learning for week after week after week together. And they make you get wet and get hot and get cold and eat. It's part of doing life together so that you become one. And we've just got it all backwards now. And so when I I wish there was this is the least romantic thing I would ever say. And I'm kind of a romantic at heart, man. I'm super high on marriage. I love romance. I'm all in it. I love it. I love dating. I love the whole thing. I love the flirty feel. I love all of it. But at some point, you have to say, we've been dating and I'm going to choose every day for the rest of my life to continue to love you. And as the great Esther Perel says, most adults will have 2 to 3 to 4 loves over the course of their lifetime. And if they work really hard, they'll be with the same person. And so I'm going to choose every day. When you decide to quit working and start gardening and then quit gardening and you're going to become a painter, I am going to decide every day I'm going to love you. And that's the way through. And what you'll do is you'll wake up and have been married 50 years and you'll have a soulmate. That's
powerful.
Really hard to make a movie about that. You know what I mean? It's hard. Hollywood hasn't landed on that one quite well.
So solid. You know, the strength of relationships and the strength of doing life as one, the strength of seeing other people in their pain, I think is so powerful. You know, I cried when I read the story about your dad at the grocery store in your book, when he was unable to buy groceries. And the cashier's doing her thing, and she's like, "Sir, the debit card was declined." And you told about how in the book the debit card was new, technology, so to speak, so it was sort of like a Russian roulette. Will it work? Will it not? I've never experienced that, but it really evoked a tender emotion in me. How do we, just sort of springing off what you were sharing about your grandparents, how do we slow down our pace in life, hear out, to see others' pain and then help, like the store manager did for him? Because I think that could really help change our future.
I think it's, man, I see a theme emerging in this show.
I do too.
I think it's a decision, a choice.
Yes, sir.
I am going to choose to see other people. I'm going to choose to live my life with my head up, my ear pods out, and my eyes ahead. I'm going to choose to nod and say hello. And I will look, and I'm not going to insert myself in every crisis because that's a recipe for disaster. But where I can serve and love, I will. And so, yeah, for the listener, that my dad had helped some families in the middle of the night through a really ugly crisis, and he was a police officer, and I want to say off the top of my head, I think he made $19,000 that year, or $21,000. So I mean, they just don't make very much money. I think now they make $40,000 a year or something for a really tough job. And he just went to get basics like bread and milk and bologna, and the card got declined. And he went to the store, he says, knowing, I know I didn't have any money in there, but I had hungry kids, and I had no choice. And it got denied, and the store manager happened to be the mother of one of the young people he had helped in the middle of the night, and she came over and punched some buttons and said, your money's no good here. Have a good day. I can get choked up now thinking about it. And he said 30 or 40 years later, he wrote, when Facebook came out, he wrote her a Facebook note, and she still remembered it. He said, I need you to know that story still rattles around my heart. And my dad has become a highly, highly generous guy as a result of that, right? So those are the kind of stories that run through legacies. And just think about this. That one act of generosity in somebody's worst moment, that inspired my mom to go back to school. Like they just had to figure out something else to do with money. It changed my family tree, that one act of generosity.
That's so powerful. I see that in your own life, just to be honest with you, and I see generosity through your life when I listen to your show and just see you interact, even when you're co-hosting with Dave or something like that. It's beautiful because I hadn't thought about that perspective until you just said it, but I just want to honor you for a minute as a friend and just say, like, man, your generosity of spirit and wisdom in being a lifeline for people is really making a difference, and I'm so proud of you.
Oh, I appreciate that, man.
Yeah.
A lot of time you get off a podcast and you go home and think, what am I doing with my life? So I appreciate that.
Yeah, you're welcome. I think in the last bit of the conversation with you today, I'd love to talk about grief for a minute. You made a statement in the book, and I hadn't thought about this. My mom, before she passed, professional counselor, specialized in grief and bereavement, and the whole thing, was a bereavement coordinator at a local hospice. And but even
I didn't know that about her. Wow.
Really? Yeah. Both of my folks are professional counselors. My dad during the day, so they had a private practice together.
Why am I not interviewing you, man?
So I told John Townsend this 3 years ago when we first met. I grew up with 2 books on the coffee table because, kids grow up and they've got maybe, I don't know, at mom's house, Martha Stewart living in a big photo book. Here was the coffee table at my house. DSM-4, 5 hadn't come out, and boundaries in relationships. So I told John
Boundaries in
Townsend,
Relationships, great book. DSM, the worst book. That's another podcast.
as a layperson, I'm pretty decent at coding people. Anyway,
Yeah.
that's what I've grown up in. So I didn't know we hadn't talked about that.
No, I didn't know. I had no idea, man. That's incredible.
Yeah, it really galvanized a huge passion for me in this space of just helping people. But anyway, all through the years of even going to my mom's office when when I was little, I never heard her say this: grief is a gift. But you said it was in the book. Tell me why. This is like,
I think you have. Yeah, I've got to say that with some context, though.
Great.
Grief is a gift.
Yeah.
But it's sure not fun.
No, for sure. And that's I'm not.
Right.
I'm not saying
It
that. Right.
is. I mean, when it's ugly, it's a nuclear bomb. I think grief. So just for clarification, grief, the way I define it is it's a gap between what we hope for and what we wanted to happen.
Yeah.
What we thought was happen and what actually did happen. And that can be as micro as I want to go get Mexican food, and my wife gets in the car and she's like, all right, let's go to dinner. But hey, we're not going to your stupid Mexican food place. We're getting burgers.
Yep.
And right then, my body goes, it starts a chemical response. Here we go. And I can choose right then to go, in my mind, say nothing. I want a Mexican food. The burgers are cool. And now I'm on. Now I've just counted cracks in the sidewalk. I've expedited that. I've just acknowledged there's a gap between what I wanted or what I thought would happen and what's reality. And I'm on it. If I don't, here's what happens in my life. I turn the radio up a little bit louder because I'm annoyed. I sit an inch closer to the window away from her. She feels the tension and either uses her limited tools to try to bridge that gap, which I then take as leave me alone, right? Now it's a whole thing.
Yeah.
Or when dad leaves or dad passes away or tough car wreck and mom dies, we sit at that precipice and look over that great chasm. And if we don't enter into that chasm, our bodies will solve for that relationship for the rest of their lives. And so what grief is a gift, it's a direction. It points us towards the things that our lives are going to be oriented toward moving forward. Grief gives us a path forward. And for people who have experienced a deep grief, like you lost your mom, you just get dropped in the jungle and there's no way out. And grief is the path. And so that's why I say grief can be quite the gift if we will enter into it. Most of us and our entire culture is oriented towards running from grief. Get away from it. It feels uncomfortable. It feels sad. It feels boring. It feels gross. Get away from it. What do you feel like? And if it feels bad, then go the other way. And so we have a culture built on distraction and yelling and screaming and anger, and grief is the path forward.
Any last thoughts on finding meaning in grief and loss? Then I know you cited David Kessler in your book. Kessler's
the
just
best.
that his book, his work, even his co-write with Kubler-Ross was remarkable. And I'm not talking about finding meaning in a dismissive type of way, like you talked about earlier, but how do we find meaning in grief and loss?
I think this is going to sound really woo-woo, man, but I think meaning finds you. I have sat with people who lost their child to suicide, and a few months later, they make the decision that they are going to live and have more joy and beauty in their life. And then I've sat with somebody else who lost their kid to suicide, who they are committed to making sure that never happens again. And so they're going to start a scholarship fund and they're going to start a program at the local whatever. And so I think meaning ultimately finds you based on your experiences, where you begin to lean when you lean into that grief, because the solutions start to open up in front of you. And meaning sometimes is as simple as it's service, right? I'm going to, my wife's been busting it, man. And if she doesn't want to have gas because it's Taco Tuesday, let's go get a burger, man. Like, I can serve in that way, or I can lose my wife in a drunk driving accident, and I'm going to sit with people who lose their spouses in a few years when I'm healed, or when I'm on a healing journey there, right? One of my closest friends in the world suffered one of the most devastating losses ever. And he sat with me, a very tough cowboy, doesn't talk a lot. When he does, he says it with a period at the end. And he sat with me in the hospital, and they had emergency surgery on my wife when she had an ectopic pregnancy that ruptured. And we didn't say a lot. One of the most extraordinary moments of grace in my life. He just sat with me, and he'd been there, and he knows. And so I think meaning finds you if you will enter into the wilderness there, into the dark.
Own your past, change your future. Dr. John Delony. Go get 18 or 34 copies right now. wintoday.tv/episode 290. Yeah, it'll really add value to you guys. I really am excited for you to get a copy of this. Learn, sit with it, take time with it. Dude, I believe in you so much.
You're so kind, man.
I believe in you so much. I mean, the first time we met in the fall of 2019 at the Ramsey event.
Here in Nashville, yeah.
Was so cool, and you've been consistent, and you've been loyal, and I just appreciate you so much, and I'm excited to champion this new message and just tell everyone and their grandma about it. So anything else today?
Well, I appreciate it. The one thing I'll add is this. Like the stuff you and I talked about is kind of heavy. A lot of it's heavy.
Yeah.
And it's the journey is heavy, man. But ultimately, the book, I think, is I know. The book's about hope. And it's about taking your power back, as the great Rage Against the Machine said. It's about, man, you don't have to live like this anymore. And you don't have to carry this anymore. And there's something so freeing and so redeeming about that message. And it's about finding patience and kindness and just entering into a whole new life that for most of us, we didn't know was possible. So I'm excited, man. And thank you for your support. You're such just a kind human being, and man,
love you, man.
I'm so grateful.
Hey, likewise. I think people know how to get a hold of you, but I'd love for you to tell them how to anyway, where to find the podcast or where to tune into the show. I know
Dr. John Delony Show. Yeah, you can find that on the podcast. We're super, super creative with that title. And at John Delony on the internets, wherever those are. JohnDelony.com, all that stuff.
You're a great follow. I have a ton of friends who just will text me and say, he's amazing. Oh my gosh, he literally is reading my mail today. So I know you're helping a ton of people, dude. So I'm so proud of you. Thanks for being here today.
Appreciate you, my brother. Thank you.
All right.